Okay, I originally filmed this about 3 months ago. It was so long ago, and it was around the time that I had an actual book club for this series, but I didn't like how it turned out, and I neglected it for a really long time. But I'm redoing it now because I'm still really excited about it. I wanted to kind of put the discussions that we were having in a video essay, and to kind of express my feelings about Lisi Harrison and the series in general, its impact on me, and how I view it now as an adult. So The Clique is a book series by Lisi Harrison. She also wrote the Monster High series, which I never read, but I do know that I love Monster High. But anyway, the series had a pretty targeted audience of tween girls. The series itself was about teen girls, like a clique of them. This clique was called the Pretty Committee, and it consisted of their alpha, MASSIE Block, ALICIA Rivera, Dylan Marvel, KRISTEN GREGORY, and outcast Claire LYONS. The first Clique book came out in 2004. There are 19 additional books that consist of a prequel and a summer series that kind of follows each girl during one specific summer. There's also a Clique manga and a Clicktionary that is full of like their slang. Lisi Harrison was actually heavily criticized for these books, with concerns from parents stating that the books were shallow. They encouraged girls to be mean and superficial, but Lisi would always retaliate by saying that the books were aspirational, that they were fantasy. She would always state that the whole series was purely satirical, that the insecurities that the girls faced were very real insecurities that adults still deal with today.
P.S. Leash and Dylan are on the line.
Hey, girlies.
Hi. Hey.
So I did want to give a little bit of a content warning, just because there is a bit of an inappropriate relationship in it between a 12-year-old and 15-year-old. And then also just another content warning because I'm going to be mentioning some fat shaming and disordered eating. It's not very detailed or graphic, but I did want to just give those disclaimers. So starting off with the book, we are introduced to the Block estate, which is where Massie and her family live. The opening scene is Massie's parents reminding Massie of the fact that this family is about to live with them in their guest house because they can't afford to live in their home in Orlando, Florida anymore. And Massie is pissed because the Lyons are poor and they're ruining her plans that she has to cancel to have dinner with them when she could be going to a cool 8th grade party. But her parents are telling her, instead of going to your party, you have to come to their welcome dinner. Massie is this preteen brunette girl. She's 12 or 13. She's in 7th grade. She's rich, white. That's basically it. She has a bob. So the Lyons family shows up with their daughter, who's Massie's age, named Claire. She shows up, blonde bangs, overalls, kids. They're from Orlando. She has a little brother, whatever. Massie is this is what I miss my party for. I'm missing a cool 8th grade party for this poor normie family. So she's not getting it, and she's pissed. And this is kind of where we first realize right away that Massie's pretty insecure, or at least has severe FOMO, and she's especially more pissed because she's missing out for this normie poor family. But she's showing Claire around the house, around the guest house where they're going to be staying. Claire's in awe. She's kind of telling Massie I can't wait to meet your friends and to meet everyone and blah blah blah. And Massie's well, you should get your own friends because we kind of have our own thing going, and we don't really want you, basically. And it's kind of the first insight at how rude Massie is, or how rude she can be, and how mean she can be. Then a little bit later, Massie goes off to her horse stable trails where she blows off some steam because she's a horse girl, and she goes riding, and she meets a boy there named Chris Abley, who she learns went to boarding school. He's a bad boy. He's coming back to the brother school of Massie's school. He's going to be a freshman, and she's going to be going into 7th grade. So cut to the first day of school, which is a few days later. Claire's feeling a little bit insecure because she's yo, this girl is stylish. I imagine that everyone at this school is going to be stylish, and I got on white Gap jeans. What? I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And then she learns that she's going to be riding with Massie in the Block Range Rover with their driver and Massie's friends to school every day. So she gets in the back of the Range Rover. She meets all of Massie's friends. This is where, for the first time, we meet Alicia, KRISTEN, and Dylan. Their descriptors kind of right off the bat are Alicia being pretty, brunette, Latina. This is where the content warning kind of comes in. Disordered eating is never explicitly stated, but it's definitely insinuated, and it's typically rather ignored unless it's weaponized against Dylan. Dylan is the redhead. She has a famous mom, and she's always eating diet food. And Kristen is kind of the relatable, like, sporty, smart one, but she has a Jade from the Bratz movie moment when she gets in the car and she like takes her sweatsuit off and she's like wearing a mini skirt and whatever. So during the car ride, Massie's kind of ignoring the fact that Claire's there. She doesn't even really introduce her to the other friends until they notice that she's back there and are like frightened. They all get out of the car when they arrive at school and they leave Claire in the back, and just right off the bat it's like Claire's in for a storm because these girls are obviously not nice. So since it's Claire's first day at a new school, she's kind of trying to figure out like if any of the other girls have classes with her and just kind of like asking questions about everything. Massie's being rude to her. Massie was like, Claire, did I invite you to my BBQ? Why are you all up on my grill? I'm gonna read off some of the dialogue between them during this moment. Massie says, Claire, this isn't Clueless, okay? Why don't you just make your own friends and worship me from afar like everyone else? I practically live with you, Massie. I can't just go away, no matter how hard you try to make me. You obviously haven't seen me try. I was just wondering, are you a female dog? What? No. Why? Because you're acting like a real bitch. Okay, and this is the thing, that little like riddle at the end, that is something that Massie does kind of all the time, but Claire was using it against her. It's just like a thing that she does to be like clever. After that, Massie texts the rest of the group and tells them that Claire called us a bitch. Not just her, but us. So they're like, oh no. Claire realizes that she has art class with Alicia and Kristen. She sits next to Alicia even though she was saving that seat for Kristen. As revenge, Alicia wipes red paint on Claire's white Gap jeans, poses it as her just like tripping and falling, and like Claire didn't notice, whatever. And Alicia texts Kristen. She's like, Claire got her period. Claire gets up to the front of the room. The art teacher, Vincent, notices that she has the red paint on the back of her pants, thinks it's her period, writes her a note to the nurse. Claire's confused because she's like, I feel fine, and he's like, just go. She asks Alicia and Kristen where the nurse's office is. They give her wrong directions. She ends up finding it. The nurse is like, you got your period? She's like, no, I didn't. The nurse is like, here, let me go get the lost and found. You can shop whatever you want from it because this stuff was last season to these girls. They don't want it. So then Claire realizes like, oh, Alicia put red paint on my pants. She gets this new fit. She feels like so cute in her little designer lost and found outfit. And she goes to the cafeteria. Claire grabs like a chocolate bar, and the lunch lady is like, finally a girl around here who eats chocolate. Claire notices that all the tables have like 6 chairs, but the pretty committee table only has 4 for just the 4 of them, so there's no room for her. So she's trying to find someone else to sit with, and she sees this group of like alt girls, like this little like, okay, like little punk group, and she sits with them. 2 of the girls leave, but one of them stays. Her name is Lane ABELEY. She and Claire are bonding over digital cameras, over hating Drew Barrymore, over skater boys, all kinds of stuff. Lane's kind of like, I noticed that you've been hanging around Massie, like, what's that about? And Claire's like, yeah, we're like pretty close friends, but she's just like so jealous and is just lying because Massie does not like her. Meanwhile, Massie is talking to the rest of the pretty committee, talking about Chris ABELEY, who she met at the horse stables, and they're absolutely gassing her. Then Kristen's kind of telling the group, like, I have a project coming up. I need to get an A. Can you guys help me? I need to start a business. And they're like, yes, obviously. So she wants to start a makeup company, and she needs their help. She needs to get an A. They're going to help her. Later, at the guest house, Claire's chilling with her brother. Kendra, Massie's mom, comes into the guest house unannounced, tells Claire that she's invited to Massie's sleepover that she has every Friday. And Massie's like, are you sure? Because I don't think that Massie likes me very much. And Kendra's like, no, like for real, she wants you to come, I want you to come, they all want you to come. Claire calls Lane, who she made plans with for that Friday, and says that her brother's sick and she has to take care of him and she's lying, blah blah blah, whatever. Claire makes her way over to the mansion. She shows up in this trash fit. She's just wearing her pajamas. Everyone else is fully dressed, so she's already feeling a little bit embarrassed. But they're sorting clothes into donation bins. Claire's like, I can go get some clothes, like I'll donate some stuff. And they're like, oh no, we're good, like we want them to actually take the clothes, it's okay. And then Massie makes some weird comment about Kristen like always sneaking and taking clothes out of the boxes when no one's watching. They go set up for the sleepover. It's like 4 of the sleeping bags for the pretty committee in a circle, and they don't really make any room for Claire. As the sleepover goes on, it's like typical sleepover stuff. They're talking about boys. Massie's talking about kissing Chris ABELEY. They're eating snacks. They're playing Would You Rather. They're bullying Claire. Alicia makes like a fart noise with her mouth. Goes, Claire, did you just fart? And Claire goes, that's funny, Alicia. I thought it was the sound of your boobs rubbing together. Massie's trying to stifle her laughter, but then Claire's kind of like feeling uncomfortable, so she gets up and leaves. Massie tries to have a nice moment, and she's like, don't leave, like blah blah blah. And Claire's like, I want to leave, like I'm going. A new day. Layne and Claire are hanging out. Layne comes over. She pulls up in a Jaguar with her dad and her brother, who turns out to be Chris ABELEY. So Claire is like, oh. I'm about to plot. I'm about to scam. She like makes an excuse to touch Chris's hair, but make sure that she gets Massie's attention first. And Massie's so confused. She's like, what is Chris doing at my house? Does Chris like girls with bangs? Should I get bangs? And again, it's just another like insecure moment. Massie and Chris have plans to ride again together, so they go back to the stables, farm, Galway Farms, whatever. And Massie's asking Chris a few questions, and she asks him what he does for fun. And he tells her party stuff, and Massie's kind of like, okay, well, what does that mean? And he's like, my parents are out of town, like entertaining my guests, whatever. And Massie's like, okay. Well, she's kind of like in her head, like, if I'm going to date a 15-year-old, like I'm going to have to do what 15-year-olds do, and I'll just figure it out while I'm there. Then she also lies about liking Layne, his sister, who she really thinks is a loser and like is one of her bully victims. But she tells Chris, like, yeah, we should hang out with Layne. Like, we should invite her next time. I love her. Just trying to get closer to him because now she knows that that's his sister. While this is going on, Claire wants to swim at the block pool, so she heads over there. The pretty committee is having this meeting for Kristen's project to make this makeup company. She encourages them to join her in the pool, but they think she's lame, and they're like, you have on a bargain bin bathing suit on right now, like we're not swimming with you. And she is like, that's funny, this is an original Astrid. They're like, oh, yeah, I read a whole article about him like in a magazine. And Claire's like, you mean her? Just basically gaslighting them because she knows that bathing suit was from Target. But since they felt like they didn't know about it and that she had like a designer suit on, they were like, okay, yeah, we'll have fun, we'll like swim with you. So they jump in the pool, they're swimming, and Massie's late because she's obviously at the farm, but then she shows up while they're having fun in the pool. She's like, that's definitely a Target bathing suit, get out the pool and dump food on her. So she encourages the pretty committee to dump food on Claire. She gets upset, she goes home. This is where Claire sort of becomes a little bit, this is her Joker era, because she realizes that every night Massie walks her dog for about 20 minutes. So she leaves the house with her dad and her dog for about 20 minutes every night. During this time, she seizes her opportunity to go in Massie's bedroom, to sneak in there and start messaging the other members of the pretty committee from Massie's computer, pretending to be Massie. So Claire messages Alicia and is like, wear shorts and tights, like denim shorts and colored tights tomorrow. Alicia's like, what are you talking about? And Claire's like, I read it in Teen Vogue or some shit like that. Just wear it tomorrow. Also, love Claire now. Oh, and she tells Alicia to tell all the other girls to do it too. The next day, Massie gets in the Range Rover so she can carpool to school with all the girls, and Claire's wearing her outfit, and she makes a comment about how she didn't realize that the Peter Pan tryouts were that day. Claire's like, whatever, because she knows that these girls are about to come in wearing the same thing that she is. So they all show up in the tights and denim, whatever. Massie's like, what the fuck? What are y'all wearing? And Alicia's like, what are you wearing? Another moment of insecurity. Also just like middle school vibes. Massie is like, I had my tights on, but Bean, her dog, ripped them up before I left, so I had to change. And she's feeling so insecure. She's thinking that no one's gonna think that she's an alpha anymore because everyone's wearing something different, and that she's losing her power and her grip and whatever. Just very insecure. And it sort of reminded me of like, I don't know how universal this experience is, but like in middle school and early high school, texting your friends the night before the next day and being like, will you wear a dress or skirt with me tomorrow? Because like you don't want to be the only one wearing it. Very stupid, very childish, very silly, but it was giving that vibe. So then later, Alicia tells Claire that they should go shopping for Dylan's upcoming birthday party. Alicia gives Claire like her dad's old cell phone, even though Claire's not allowed to have a cell phone, but she's like, don't worry about it. This is when Claire kind of makes it a habit of going into Massie's bedroom and messaging the other girls off of Massie's computer. She is chatting with Dylan, and Dylan's kind of describing this outfit that she wants to wear the next day to school. I think it's like a mini skirt or some shorts or something like that, and Claire says something about her basically just fat shaming her. Dylan shows up the next day to school and in the car, and she has on like a baggy fit, and Massie's like, what the are you wearing? And Dylan's like, I wouldn't want to show my thunder thighs or whatever, and Massie's confused because she's like, where's this coming from? Again, Claire gets back on Massie's computer one night and is messaging KRISTEN. She's anxious about getting an A on her project, and Claire's like, what is the big deal? Claire, as Massie, is like, what is the big deal? Like, why do you need an A so bad? And KRISTEN's kind of like, I'm gonna tell you a secret, but you can't tell anyone. And Claire's like, Claire, as Massie, is like, I'll tell you a secret if you tell me yours. She tells KRISTEN, like, I've been secretly hanging out with Claire, and she's my bestie, and I love her, blarg. And KRISTEN's like, okay. Anyway, basically I'm poor, and I'm at OCD on a scholarship. Since Claire has been messaging all the girls, there's been like built up tension between Massie and the rest of the pretty committee, because they think that she is being so shady and weird and mean, but she has no clue that any of it's going on. There's an instance like where they're in gym class and they're playing tennis, and Claire gives KRISTEN her extra racket, and Massie tells KRISTEN, like, since when can't you afford your own tennis racket? Obviously KRISTEN is upset because she just told Massie that she isn't very wealthy. But then they catch on, they realize what's going on, they do a surprise 5-way call on Claire, very Mean Girls-esque, expose her, and she is humiliated. So after the brief period of like tension and the pretty committee not really being friends with Massie, they get together and they make the lip gloss for KRISTEN's project using at-home ingredients, and they plan to sell it at their upcoming field trip. At the same time, Layne and Claire become friends again because Layne realized that Claire had lied to her about Todd being sick, but they make up because they're like, we just both wanted to be accepted by Massie, like, whatever. So they go on this field trip, they're on the bus, and the lip glosses sell out. They're like literally selling it on the bus. Immediately, dozens of people on the bus have an allergic reaction. They realize that the girls made the lip glosses with almond oil, and a lot of these people have nut allergies. While everything's going on, while none of the adults are doing anything to help, Claire receives a text that is saying like oatmeal, because Layne loves oatmeal. Claire's kind of like, okay, leave Layne alone, like, why are you bullying her? These people are having an allergic reaction, whatever. And the other person who's texting her is like, no, like, use the oatmeal, it'll help the reaction. So Claire gets up and starts giving people this oatmeal. I think she actually like sells them the oatmeal. Saves the day. It helps. It goes away. Whatever. Then when they get off the bus, KRISTEN thanks Claire for like helping out, and she's also like, I'm glad that I told you my secret and not Massie. Thank you for keeping it on the down low. And they make amends or whatever, kind of. There's like a benefit that happens every year at the block estate at Massie's family's house. Various items are auctioned off, and the money goes to the schools in the area. Massie's super excited because everyone goes to this benefit, so she knows that Chris Avery's going to be there. And she's like, I need to look hot for my guy. I need to look hot for my man. Massie wants her friends to see her talking to Chris when they arrive, so she goes over to where Chris is, and Layne is like, Massie, I want to introduce you to someone, and introduces Massie to Chris's girlfriend, who we are just now hearing about. So in an attempt to seem carefree, Massie is like, oh, hey, and says the girlfriend's name wrong. Her name is Fawn, but she calls her Dawn. And she walks away and starts dancing with some random boy. When her friends show up, they're asking about Chris, and she's like, no, ew, he had a booger in his nose, like, I'm not into him, whatever. The book, this is kind of where it ends. Claire and Massie are like hiding from their dads because their dads are singing on stage and inviting them on stage, and they don't want to go up there. So they're hiding in a bush. They're sharing candy, and Claire realizes that Massie's the person who sent the text about the oatmeal on the bus. They sort of make up. They don't really apologize, but they make amends. And their journey continues throughout 19 more books. Now that we're caught up on what happens in the book, I want to like dive into my notes, what I was writing down, what I was observing, and why I don't like Lisi Harrison.
Do we like her? No.
So as I mentioned before, Lisi was like heavily criticized for the series. Like, the story was seen as shallow, it was sending children the wrong messages, and every time that she responded to criticism, it seemed like she took it very personally. She was very passive about it, and defensive. She was literally at her own book signing and asked a bunch of children who were reading the Clique series, she asked them very leading questions and was trying to get some reassurance from these children that they knew that the books were satirical and that she wasn't encouraging them to act like this, as if these children were going to argue with her and be like, oh no, we didn't know that. And in the same video, she tells one of the children there that she could kiss them on the mouth after they answer a question for her, which by the end of this video I don't think will be that surprising.
At her point with a leading question for sure, but still.
Do you guys get that these books, that I'm not saying that wearing labels on clothes, and I'm not saying this is a way we should live our lives, right?
Anyone is like insecure, even the like alphas, anyone, like they just show that they're mean to like cover it all up.
Thank you. I would lip kiss you right now if I wasn't so far away.
But anyway, Lisi claims that the books are entirely satirical. She's playing off of like very, very real insecurities that people feel in middle school, insecurities that last from middle school into adulthood. But again, I'm asking, why didn't she write about young adults or even like older teenagers? At least like something more appropriate than middle schoolers. Why couldn't she have polished these books more, gone more into depth about why these characters aren't role models, and why their behavior shouldn't be mimicked by children? She made the characters really young. She made her target audience preteen girls. She describes the characters and their behaviors very inappropriately and at a very surface level. Now, all that aside, I loved the series when I was younger. Like, I was obsessed. Now, I read them at 22 and I'm analyzing them at 23. And I think it's hilarious, the way that the girls act and whatever, because it reminds me of middle school and how ridiculous things are. But I'm also pretty disgusted and disappointed by Lisi Harrison and her attempt to write a series geared towards this age group, towards this demographic. I don't think that she intended for children to read these books and then 11 years later revisit them and give like some sort of analysis on them to like find satirical themes or to like understand the satire now. I feel like adults are definitely equipped to see the satire and something like that, but literal children don't have as much of a grasp on that. Like there were some parts of the satire that I could definitely like see as a child, but so much of it just was swept under the rug for me. And as a young child, like there were so many things that just went over my head, or things that I absorbed and thought were okay and didn't realize were part of the satire, if that was her intention with the parts that I'm talking about anyway. But I loved MASSIE as a kid, and I thought that she was so powerful and rich and pretty and popular. And the pretty committee went to like these cool parties and they talked to boys and they were just like the it girls. Like they were like it at their school. Yeah, I really liked them and I really enjoyed reading the books because they were like that. I remember wanting to be just like MASSIE when I was in middle school. And I remember encouraging myself like to be meaner and more superficial and to wear clothes that I neglected in my closet that had designer labels, but that were like thrifted. It wasn't like I was like shopping or whatever, but like if I had like a little Ralph Lauren shirt in my closet, I suddenly was like, I'll wear this because they were wearing it in the pretty committee. At the same time, I would show up to school in this stuff, still get bullied, which doesn't mean anything. Like regardless of what I wore, I was gonna get bullied. But I was not really fitting in outside of my friend group regardless. So I didn't really see a solution to these books. And I didn't see them as satire. I just knew that I didn't want to be a Claire or a Layne and that I wanted to be a MASSIE. And I felt like a Claire and a Layne for so long. Since they were perceived as the losers of the series, I was like, I need to elevate. I need to be someone who's part of the pretty committee. I guess an argument for the characters being so young would be to heighten the supposed satire that Lisi Harrison was trying to achieve. But I feel like if Lisi were a good writer, she could have done that with older characters. Even like adults acting juvenile would have been satirical on its own. So I don't know why, again, she needed to use middle schoolers to tell this story. I think it's interesting that like while I wanted so badly to relate to MASSIE and so badly wanted to relate to the pretty committee and to like be a girl that was like those girls, wearing the stuff like the Ralph Lauren, whatever like labels I did have in my closet, I started paying more attention to. Regardless of all that, there was still this overarching whiteness to the series. I haven't, like I said earlier, I haven't reread the whole series and I don't think that I will. I do trust my memory, and I do remember there being one black character specifically in the whole series. I only remember one black character. She was an actress among other actresses that, spoiler alert, Massie hired to be her friends once the pretty committee dropped her. So she just hired like a group of people to pretend to be her friend, and a black character was one of the actresses. Also, another spoiler alert, turns out ALICIA, who's supposed to be the Latina of the group, I guess her family was lying, or she was lying, but her last name in the books was always Rivera, but in this specific book it was revealed that her last name was actually Rivers and that she's white. Everyone was like pretty shocked because ALICIA had, or at least Lisi Harrison had made it her entire personality. I'm not even sure if she was like a white Latina. Like I can't tell. But anyway, the pretty committee is basically just 4 white girls and one of them has red hair. So it was really difficult for me to see myself in that, even though I really wanted to be like that. So it was kind of setting an unachievable standard for myself as like a 12-year-old.
Latte, anyone?
Starting with Massie, it was pretty easy to recognize, even when we were younger, that Massie was like rather villainous. She had like very antagonistic behaviors. Regardless of still looking up to her, like I could recognize that she was mean, also insecure, but I didn't realize that she just wasn't able to like process her emotions or like express herself or her emotions in a healthy way. While I was rereading it made me wonder about the people who were parenting her, which would be Kendra and William Block. Massie's parents are present on a very surface level, yet they're very absent emotionally. It seems like they raised a child on material things and then ignored any emotional problems that she had and disregarded her as a spoiled child. I think that they're really the true villains of the series, along with pretty much almost all of the adults, including Lisi Harrison. Kendra and William are just very ignorant. You can see it from the beginning, and I feel like Lisi Harrison is ignorant in the way that she writes about them being ignorant, but also in many other ways. On the very first page, Massie, like I said, is upset about the LYONS coming into her house. The passage that I'm specifically referring to is a moment where Kendra, Massie's mom, is trying to explain to her like, oh well, like they're moving here, but it says she spoke very slowly and enunciated every word in much the same way she talked to Inez, their live-in housekeeper. Another quote, later when the LYONS come around, Massie noticed that her mother's diamond rings were turned around, which Massie knew meant the LYONSes didn't have a lot of money. Kendra always did that when she didn't want the less fortunate to feel uncomfortable. It's like, they know that you're married, why would they be uncomfortable by your wedding ring? Like, there's just a lot of like white savior undertones in here. It's kind of giving Little Fires Everywhere. It's like this grand gesture of allowing this less fortunate family to stay with a wealthy family, and them feeling reassured in themselves that they're good people, but also just being very performative about it. I wonder how the series would be different if the LYONS family weren't white, but I doubt that Lisi Harrison would write about non-white people, at least making them the main characters. Kendra, Massie's mom, is also like insensitive towards houseless people. In later books, I remember her referring to, or at least like naming a charity, Ho Ho Homeless. I'm not sure if like Lisi really understands the layers to the characters that she's writing about, but I also can't tell if she was like trying to make Massie more isolated in her meanness by making her parents seem more charitable, or if she was trying to make the Blocks seem performative, but I honestly don't think that she gave it that much thought based on the way that these books are written. But anyway, it's very obvious that Massie severely lacks emotional support. Her values really do lie in superficiality, and it's seen like from the way, you know, her hair is done to her clothes to her like Regina George ass room. She very much does value material things, which is completely fine, but it seems like her default is to go towards these things when she needs to feel joy or emotional support. She has her friends, but you can tell that there's not really a foundation for these friendships. Her relationships with pretty much everyone are extremely shallow, always insecure. She always has FOMO. She's constantly trying to control the people around her to get what she wants, or so that she feels secure. Pairing that with emotionally absent parents who treat her like a spoiled brat, of course the only way that she can navigate puberty is by lashing out and by being mean to make herself feel better, and that is why I really do see MASSIE as a victim. Before we get into the other characters, I wanted to just mention that one of the members of my book club brought up the fact that Lisi Harrison, before writing the Clique series, worked at MTV, and we were just kind of making comparisons because I feel like when you watch an MTV show or movie, the characters are caricatures. They have very exaggerated personality traits that really only cater to plot points. They're just extremely flat characters, and this is really reflected in the way that Lisi writes about the characters in the Clique.
What's up, chica?
The first time that we hear about Alicia, Massie is showing Claire around the Block estate. They're looking at a photo of Massie and the rest of the pretty committee. A passage from this moment reads, Claire pointed to a sultry-looking girl with impossibly glossy dark hair. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I have never used the word sultry to describe a 13-year-old or any child for that matter at all. I guess that I could kind of sort of understand if this was Claire saying this, but this is the narrator saying this. The definition of sultry is hot and humid when referring to weather, or attractive in a way that suggests a passionate nature, and synonyms for sultry being hot, seductive, and sexy. Another quote from the book, she watched Alicia cross her arms in front of her chest like she had just caught a chill, but Massie knew she was hiding her big boobs. She always did when she got nervous. And then we have Claire driving at Alicia for her boobs at the sleepover when Alicia made the fart noise. Her body is just brought up a lot throughout the series. Kind of in the same realm, the narrator refers to Massie's breast when she's riding her horse and says her A cups bounced along with her. And then Massie kind of leans over to her horse Brownie and says she's going into 7th grade as a bra wearer. There we go. I feel like developing in that way is a very hot topic when you're going through puberty and you're in middle school and whatever, but I think there's something to be said about autonomy. Massie telling her horse that she's gonna wear a bra is like one thing, because that is very relatable. I feel like in middle school I was texting my friends when I first got a bra. I was like, yo, I'm wearing a bra now. But for the characters to be making fun of Alicia because she has big boobs, I mean, even to just describe like her A cups bouncing along, like that is just a little bit scary to me. Yeah, Alicia in the first book says anything about her own boobs that feels empowered or that feels it's coming from her own perspective. I guess the way that Lisi is talking about and discussing puberty, or at least that moment in puberty, it just doesn't feel realistic. I don't know if she's just so far detached from that era in adolescence now that she would describe a 13-year-old character with large breasts as sultry, also repeatedly sexualizing her. But she never touches on this insecurity for Alicia. There's never a moment when Alicia realizes that she doesn't have to be insecure about the way that her body's developing, and that it's not even something that someone should be made fun of for. Layering that with her being introduced as like this sultry character and her constantly being sexualized, it's feeding directly into a very terrible trope, and Lisi is really failing in desexualizing breasts on children. So again, I ask, what is her goal? Insecurities that the girls in this series are facing, I feel, are very complex and they're very relatable, but Lisi treats them with such carelessness and such ignorance. And I'm not even asking for her acknowledgement of these insecurities to be like extremely in-depth or complex or whatever, because I know that this series is geared towards the age group that is geared towards, but I just wish that she at least put a little bit of care or a little bit of guidance or something, any sort of substance or reassurance or validation into this for her juvenile audience, allowing them to like recognize that the way the girls in this book treat each other is very damaging, especially regarding their insecurities. And I just wonder, like, how did she think her audience was going to react to this and relate to this? Like, what was her goal? What were they going to take away from it? And I was over on the Clique Wiki fandom, that, you know, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Alicia has a description on there that reads, she's known as an exotic beauty because of her dark hair, tan skin, and big boobs. Again, I'm not saying that I'm expecting this to be like a grand novel for children, because I understand who the audience is, but I would just hope, if that were your intended audience, that you would put a little bit of more substance into that. Like, it's for children. Children are very impressionable. Like, I would hope that someone would put just a little bit more care into that. It's starting to get dark, but I'm gonna keep going. Whatever. it really sucks because I was one of the children who was really impressionable who was reading this series. I still value the nostalgia I have for this series and even the impact that it had as like an ultra femme pop culture phenomenon, but reading it as an adult made me very upset.
Thanks, but I don't eat sugar.
My notes for Dylan say redheaded otherness because she is the redhead of the group and they treat her like that, and that's about as other as this book gets besides Layne, and also besides Claire, who is just like an outcast. But Dylan is definitely treated the worst out of the pretty committee. The first time we meet her is the same time we meet ALICIA and KRISTEN, and I just want you to listen to the differences between the way that the girls are described. ALICIA was the most beautiful girl Claire had ever seen, the kind no one ever gets mad at because they don't want her looking unhappy. Her dark brown eyes sparkled brightly against her perfectly even tan, and her lips were full and cherry red. She's in vintage Ralph Lauren and has the new Prada messenger bag, MASSIE said. KRISTEN. She hunched over in the dimly lit lobby of the luxury building working on a crossword puzzle. Her long, dirty blonde hair covered her face. KRISTEN GREGORY was one of those people who bounced when she walked. Her tiny frame was made entirely of muscle, just like Claire's. Finally, someone she could relate to. Claire decided she liked KRISTEN the best so far. Like the others, she was dressed head to toe in designer wear, but her choices were pure comfort food. Orange Puma sneakers, chocolate brown velour sweats, and a matching hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. And then we have Dylan's description. Dylan Marvel was perched on the stone steps in front of her house reading Us Weekly and eating a nutrition bar. A thick mass of fiery red hair blew around her pale face, which she was fighting to keep away from her mouth so she could eat. When she saw the Range Rover, she stuffed her magazine in her Louis Vuitton backpack and ran down the remaining steps. Dylan was at least 2 inches taller and wider than the other two girls. Claire thought she looked like a girl who had grown up milking cows or churning butter on a farm. Unlike the other two girls, there's no description about Dylan's outfit. She's not the favorite, she's not the prettiest, but she's just bigger than them and she looks like she was raised on a farm. Regarding her pale skin and her hair, I can really see white people viewing this as probably the most naturally other that you can get while still being white, and I'm not really understanding why her body image issues are being projected onto the other girls. Why would Claire observe her being 2 inches bigger than the other girls? Like, it'd be one thing if Dylan were insecure about herself, but why are the other characters and the narrator feeding into this insecurity of hers? But yeah, from the start, as soon as Dylan gets in the car, she's talking about her diet and her food and eating, and she continues to do so, along with talking about her body for the rest of the series. But again, who is this serving? What is the audience supposed to gain from this? Where is the support that the author should be offering? Because there's clearly like a very big, severe underlying issue that's not being addressed. And something else that's just really annoying is that on the back of each book there's kind of like a description for each girl that kind of talks about what that specific girl is confronting in that specific book. On the back of book 2, Dylan's description states that she has lost weight and she plans on using her hot new bod to snag a new guy. Again, compared to the other girls, Dylan's description centers on her body image. Although I planned on reading the whole series, I stopped after the first book, but I'm assuming that the solution to Dylan's insecurity is her changing her body in order to attract a boy as a 13-year-old. So, do I need to ask the question again? Should I turn on the lamp? I think I'll turn on the light. Okay, anyway.
Relax, Claire.
I really do view Claire as kind of like the premature, not like most girls trope. She and Layne are probably like the most relatable characters in this series, since they're not like as wealthy as the others, at least not extraordinarily superficial. They're not as popular, whatever. I think if you have been bullied or have encountered mean girls, you know what it's like to be Claire. But she also, like I said, in her Joker era, becomes rather villainous when she's fed up with the way that she's being treated. It kind of brings all the girls to a very similar level, which I guess is just being in middle school. On Claire's first day of school, Vincent, who I mentioned before, the school's art teacher, he's an art instructor at an all-girls middle school, yet he becomes uncomfortable when he believes that Claire started her period because ALICIA smeared the red paint on her pants, and instead of telling her why he's sending her to the nurse, he just like kind of shuts down and refuses to answer her questions or like offer any guidance. And then she, goes to the nurse, but then she goes to the cafeteria. The lunch lady, who I also mentioned, was being really weird about her being like a girl, finally being a girl who eats chocolate, which further enables the not like most girls trope, but also supports my claim that the true villains in this damn series are the adults. There's clearly an issue if she's even saying this about middle schoolers not eating sugar. I don't understand why she hasn't stepped in as an adult in this school who observes the eating habits of these little girls, but she's relieved at the idea that this little girl is eating chocolate, praising her instead of taking it to other adults or offering support to the other kids at this school, who I'm assuming she's dismissing as being superficial and like worried about their image and whatever, instead of treating them like 13-year-old girls who clearly have some underlying issues going on. And it may not even seem that deep. This is literally like just some random book, but these books were extremely popular at a time where we were very impressionable, and these things can very easily become ingrained. It was very easy for me to get fixated on this book series and make it my world. When your audience is this sort of age group, you have to be careful, and it just makes it very clear that Lisi Harrison lacks the ability to be able to write towards this audience. When Claire goes to the nurse and she's taking clothes from the lost and found, there's kind of like this transformative moment that I feel like is very similar to Katie Heron from Mean Girls, or even like the bimboification of less feminine presenting women in more mature films, or at least films with like older audiences. Claire puts on this fabulous clothing. She wants to attract people to her, and she wants to make friends, and she wants to fit in. She becomes sneaky and mean, and she starts lying as soon as she puts these clothes on, like when she lied to Layne about being Massie's friend when that wasn't the case. She gets what she wants when she does it. She starts sneaking into Massie's room, getting Massie's friends to turn against her. She gets a new phone, she gets new clothes, new friends. Yet at the end of the book, she's able to revert back to kind of her old self and drop the clothes, drop the act, and realize that that's not who she is and who she wanted to be. Meanwhile, the rest of the girls, those are their character traits. Like, that's what their personality is, these clothes and money and friends and whatever. Claire kind of comes out as the final girl, while the traits are still used to antagonize the rest of the pretty committee. And Claire is the one who is seen as morally sound. It's the exact same thing that we see happen in Mean Girls. It's pretty similar to what we see in 13.
Who's the stowaway?
And next we have Kristen, who's not really focused on until the second half of the book. Pretty much all we know about her until then is that she's pretty studious and she likes sports. Then her secret's revealed about halfway through the book, and we learn that she's less fortunate than the rest of the girls. She really only exists to be the poor one. I've compared her to Dorinda in the past, but even in Cheetah Girls, I feel like Dorinda contributed more to the group than Kristen did. Kristen is literally just there to be poor. Her interests in in sports and in school cater to her needing a scholarship to stay at school. They're not necessarily her passions or genuine interests, but we know that she needs those things to stay on her scholarship. And then if you remember during the sleepover, Massie made the comment about Kristen sneaking and taking clothes from the boxes. I feel like this is just an inconsistency and another example of Lisi Harrison being an inadequate writer. But these girls have been friends since 4th grade, which we learn when from the prequel, they're in 4th grade, and they never noticed that anything changed. And Kristen says that she used to be wealthy, but her dad lost a job or something and they had to move and whatever. But they never noticed. They never went to her apartment, or I don't know. Also, when referring to Kristen, I'm using the word poor very loosely, because when Claire's posing as Massie, and Kristen's kind of revealing that she's on a scholarship, Claire's like, well, I thought you lived in this one luxury apartment building, because Kristen kind of poses as living there, and Kristen's like, no, I live in the apartment building next to it. They're living in Westchester, New York. Her apartment building is neighbors with this luxurious apartment building where wealthy people do live, and wealthy enough that she would want to pose as living there. I wonder what her rent is. I would assume that if she were actually poor, she wouldn't even live in the area. This is something we talked about in the book club too. Wealth is probably very relative. She's not as wealthy as Massie, but she's not poor. Especially since she's talking to Claire, and I kind of wonder how Claire felt about this, because Claire is coming from a family who couldn't afford to live in their own home in Orlando, and they had to move to New York, which also I'm curious about the logistics of that, because was there no one in Florida or in the South in general that they could have lived with? Claire had friends back home that I'm sure she could have stayed with, but this is just what I'm talking about with Lisi Harrison. You don't know.
Oh, oatmeal?
I think is probably the most relatable character in the series. She's weird, she's alternative, she loves oatmeal, she has colorful hair. I did have a few qualms with her character descriptions when we are first introduced to her. The narrator described her hair as being separated into 7 braids, which just sort of reminded me of when white people get braids and they only have enough hair to maybe put it into 10 braids maximum. She's also described as looking similar to Tom Cruise, but her wild braided hair is what sets her apart. And as I was kind of visualizing Layne, it was like obvious that she was alternative. Since she's seen as a loser and an outcast, she's obviously more other than Dylan is, who is in the pretty committee and has red hair and they treat her poorly. But like Layne is completely different because she's not even in the friend group. So they really don't like her. But I started to wonder if her physical descriptors cater to the idea that blackness is alternative and other and undesirable. I was hesitant to bring that up because I didn't want to feel like I was reaching, but the more that I talk about it and kind of the other instances that this happens in media, like I just feel less like I am reaching, especially because blackness is already inherently punk. I'm not saying that this is single-handedly Lisi Harrison's doing. I think that she was just feeding into it. She was enabling it through Layne. The traits that align with blackness being presented as weird yet alternative and exotic in a cool way, because although the pretty committee views Layne as a loser, like the reader is supposed to relate to her or at least see her as cool because she's nice and Claire becomes friends with her, and we know that Claire is like the morally sound one when it comes to her versus the pretty committee. So I'm assuming that the reader is supposed to find Layne endearing and cool, and if she's supposed to be seen as the cool girl, I do feel like that sort of attitude enables appropriation. But I gotta say, I'm not sure if the braids that she has are supposed to be box braids or what they're supposed to be. I doubt that if they were box braids that Lisi Harrison would know how to properly describe them, but I still think that the whole point is very valid. We see something extremely similar with Missy from the original Bring It On movie, who is coming in from this neighborhood where the Clovers are from, which is the black cheer squad. So she's coming from like a primarily black neighborhood and black school. She shows up to this white ass school with these temporary dreads. The popular girls on the cheer team immediately are like, no, we don't want her, and they want to immediately dismiss her. I don't want to get too into that though, because I do kind of want to make a separate video about Bring It On. But I think that it's a fair comparison. Layne and Missy do remind me of each other. I feel like they're very comparable, being the alternative girls. The thing that sets them apart from the normies, at least immediately upon seeing them, is their hairstyles, which directly mimic black hairstyles. Again, you could say that I'm reaching, but where do you think that alternative and punk people achieve, like how do you think that they achieve a level of otherness within their whiteness unless they appropriate other races?
I'm Chris Abel.
I feel like this character could have easily been Layne's twin. He could have easily been 12 or 13. His boarding school could have easily been in a town where he, got a girlfriend who visited him later, and she was also that same age, and then introduced to MASSIE by Layne. But Lisi, for some reason, wanted him to be 15 years old. Again, I don't think that he needed to be 15 if Lisi was going to characterize him in the way that she did, and if MASSIE was going to have the sort of relationship that she did with him. But if he were to be 15, I think that the dynamic should have been entirely different. The second time that they meet, Chris is watching MASSIE like put her hair up in a bun, and he's watching her in awe, and he tells her that he loves when girls do that, which is already like extremely inappropriate. Then when Chris and MASSIE are planning on riding together again, he refers to their next meetup by saying like, so it's a date, which I feel like could be very harmless, because I feel like it's typically a harmless phrase, but he's being flirty when he says it, and it could have easily been misconstrued by this 7th grader, because I know when I was that age, I took phrases like that and ran with them when anyone said them to me. If anyone were nice to me, I thought about them for at least the next week. So paired with all their other interactions, this doesn't seem harmless to me. I feel like if Lisi cared enough about her audience and their perceptions of this book, there could have definitely been a conversation between Chris and MASSIE where Chris made it clear that he knew that MASSIE had a crush on him, because it was not subtle. It was very obvious. And he could have reminded her of their age gap and kind of let her know that that relationship would have been inappropriate. Or she could have just made him 12 or 13. But that doesn't happen. He doesn't even tell her that he has a girlfriend. It's his sister, Layne, who tells MASSIE that, Chris has a girlfriend and introduces her to Vaughn at the benefit. But if they had that conversation, MASSIE could have still had the same reaction that she had, whether he had a girlfriend and he was a 12 or 13-year-old, or if Chris told her like that relationship would have been inappropriate, she still could have had the same reaction where it was, rooted in insecurity, and she wanted to seem careless and moved on, or at least attempted to move on immediately. But they didn't have that conversation. So instead, she wants to act mature and is asking him about things that 15-year-olds do, and she's prepping her brain to be in environments with 15-year-olds partying and entertaining guests in ways that she doesn't really understand. Again, how is the audience supposed to react and relate to this? Like, as 11, 12-year-olds reading this, when we're interacting with 15-year-olds, you know, what's supposed to come out of that? Then later, when Massie's getting ready for the benefit, there's a passage that reads, "It was important for Kris to see her in something sexy," which again is extremely inappropriate. Why would this 13-year-old need to look sexy? And I don't know if Lisi thinks that she's doing the audience a favor by like not having them get together, but still, it's the lack of detail and elaboration and clarification that makes me skeptical of her intentions. One could argue that Kris wasn't aware of Massie's crush, but she literally took his cap off of his head, took it home with her, and wore it every day to school. And Layne told him this, his sister told him this, and he brought it up to Massie with a huge grin on his face. And Massie was, you know, thinking in her head about how he was probably picturing her wearing his hat and liking the idea of it. So I kind of want to round it out and come back to Massie. One of her main things throughout the book is that she doesn't like to lose and she doesn't like to be a loser. I imagine that she probably just doesn't know how to deal with failing and vulnerability, which is why she put on a front with Kris and his girlfriend, or why she put on a front with Claire and her friends when they were getting closer and she was getting left out. These are all like her immediate reactions to these situations. Even when she sees Claire touching Kris's hair, she goes to her mirror and is wondering what she would look like with bangs, wondering if Kris likes girls with bangs and like if she could change herself. She was having a little bit of an Ariel moment, how she could change herself in order for this boy to like her so that she didn't fail. But also, her dad is a wealthy cishet white man who is a successful businessman. I wonder how that affects her views on failing and what his role is in that, because she's constantly performing in order for no one to be able to see her as vulnerable or to see her fail. She doesn't want to be perceived as weak or to show the insecurities that she truly does have. I wanted to kind of flash back to when Claire first rides to school with the rest of the pretty committee and she offers them her gummy candy, her gummy feet. Massie tells Claire that she stopped eating gummy candy when she stopped breastfeeding. But once Claire and Massie make amends in the end of the book, Claire is sharing the bag of candy with Massie and she's like, "I thought you stopped eating these like when you were a baby." And Massie says, "I just hate what they do to my thighs." And then she refers to Claire as a twig. Does Lisi elaborate on this? Absolutely not. There are never any apologies. Again, never any elaboration or clarification on any of the themes that I feel are extremely inappropriate to be in this book, in this series. But yeah, they never really apologize to each other. They just do bad things to each other. Then they'll do one good thing for each other, one nice thing to show that they care, and then they go back to being mean to each other. They never take accountability. They never say sorry. It's very, I want to say that it's middle school, but I feel like even when I was that age, I was able to like take accountability for my actions and at least say sorry. That's pretty much all I have to say about the book, at least. But I wanted to kind of talk about Tyra Banks for a second, which seems irrelevant, but she produced the movie for the clique, and I really feel like Tyra and Lisi are probably a match made in heaven. Tyra has a very grand view of herself and her impact on children. In reality, she was extremely toxic. When asked about her interest in developing the book into a movie, she explains that she's been both a Massie and Claire. She's been on both sides. Growing up in elementary school, she was bossy and a mean girl and popular, and she was a Massie. And then she says that she went to middle school and she lost a bunch of weight and she thought that she looked weird and she became a Claire because she was bullied.
I turned from looking like the normal girl to a weirdo.
That's pretty much like all that she has to say about it. There is an interview where someone asks her advice to young girls, and she basically advises young girls not to peak too early.
What sort of advice would you give to teenagers who want to be perfect and 000?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think young girls today, they have this perfection syndrome, I call it. They feel that they have to be perfect. I always tell them that if you peak too early, it's over. If you are the most popular and the finest and the best and the this and the this, and you're 13 years old, honey, it's all downhill from there. You know, it's actually better to have certain awkward stages in your adolescence so that you can peak as an adult. I have a friend that was the most beautiful girl at 13, and she was the most popular, but she struggles now because she peaked in high school. No peaking.
And that was her advice. But yeah, I'd really like to know other people's experience with this series and the movie in general, or even Tyra Banks, because I have a few. I mean, just from watching her show in the same era, like there are things that really damaged my brain just from listening to her talk. But I feel like this series really had an impact on me as a child. It was really influential. I was very impressionable when I was reading it, as I picked out my thrifted Ralph Lauren shirt and like my charm bracelet with my initial on it, and I was trying to channel Massie in middle school, only to end up getting bullied. Just fine. A little bit of bullying, you know, sometimes it doesn't hurt. But Lisi Harrison and Tyra Banks definitely didn't help. But anyway, that's all I have to say about it. I hope you enjoyed this. Also check out Lisi Harrison's website. She's a very interesting character. That's all I have to say.